The train whistle cut through the valley air as Clara Boone clutched her travel papers, her knuckles pressed white against the worn leather grip. Before we kick off this adventure, don't forget to hit like on the video, and let us know in the comments where you're watching from. My father would never have wanted this me sold off as some stranger's mail-order bride. She murmured the words, vanishing in the steam rolling heavy across the platform at Silver Creek Station, Colorado, 1878. Back in Boston, 3 months earlier, the newspaper ad had looked like salvation. Her father lay freshly in the ground, creditors swarmed like buzzards, and then came those simple words: "Respectable rancher seeks educated Eastern lady for matrimony and companionship." Passage paid. That promise had been her lifeline, even if it carried her into a future she couldn't yet imagine. Straightening her navy dress, the finest she owned, Clara lifted her chin as passengers spilled off the cars around her. She scanned the crowd for a man holding her name on a card, but her attention snagged on a commotion near the depot office. "I don't give a damn what your ledger says," a deep voice thundered. "That shipment of cattle was due on yesterday's train. My men have stood waiting since sunup." The station master, a small fellow with spectacles perched low, stumbled backward from the towering figure leaning over the counter. "Mr. Coulter, I understand, but the telegram plainly states... The telegram states what some fool in Denver scribbled down, not what we agreed." The man snapped his palm, slamming the desk so hard nearby women gasped, Clara's eyes fixed on him. The rancher was broad-shouldered, over 6 feet tall, his lean frame carrying the raw strength of a man who lived in the saddle. His dark Stetson was shoved back, showing a bronzed face, cut sharp by sun and wind. He radiated such force it felt like he bent the air around him. "Is that Mr. Mercer?" Clara asked a woman beside her, hoping it was her intended. The woman laughed dryly. "That's Jack Coulter. He runs the biggest spread in the county. Not exactly the polite sort." Clara swallowed, thanked her, and kept scanning. But after 15 minutes, the platform emptied, and still no one came. She sank onto her trunk, stomach twisting. "Miss Boone." She looked up at a freckle-faced boy, maybe 12, a hat far too big slipping over his brow. "Yes, I'm Miss Boone," she answered, relief in her voice. "Mr. Mercer sent me," the boy said, twisting his hands. "Name's Luke Carver. I work at the general store. He wants you to meet him there." Clara frowned. Not quite the welcome I was expecting. "Best follow me, ma'am." Luke snatched her valise before she could protest and set off toward town. She caught her first real sight of Silver Creek as they walked a broad, dusty street lined with false front shops, men in sweat-stained hats, women in plain calico skirts. It was a far cry from Boston's cobblestones and brick houses. "Is his ranch far?" she asked, trying to keep up conversation. Luke shot her a look. 3 miles outside town, ma'am." The general store stood at the heart of town windows, filled with boots, bolts of cloth, and barrels of supplies. A bell jangled overhead as they stepped inside. A narrow man with thinning hair looked up from behind the counter. Miss Boone, I presume?" He wiped his hands on his apron and came around with a smile that didn't quite touch his eyes. "Vance Mercer. Welcome to Silver Creek." Clara forced a polite smile, extending her hand. The man was at least 20 years older than she'd expected, closer to 50, soft palms limp grip. "Thank you for arranging my passage, Mr. Mercer. Your letters were very kind." "Yes, well, about that." Vance cleared his throat, glancing away. "My sister showed up from St. Louis last month. She's keeping house for me now. Truth is, Miss Boone, I no longer require a wife." The words hollowed her out. "I don't understand." "Circumstances changed. I've paid for a room at the boarding house. Tomorrow you'll head back east, first-class fare, my expense." Blood drained from her face. But I sold everything. I have nowhere to return. Mercer shrugged, uncomfortable but unmoved. I'm sorry, but a man's got to look after family. My sister needs me more than I need a bride. You'll have your ticket home. Many would call that generous. His voice hardened. Luke, take Miss Boone's bag to Mrs. Wilkins's boarding house. Clara stood frozen, humiliated, fire in her throat. Mr. Mercer. She tried again, but the bell above the door rang. Mercer. I need 20 pounds of nails and a new pair of wire cutters. The ones you sold me broke in a week. The voice halted. Clara turned. The rancher from the station filled the doorway, the sun cut off behind his tall frame. His eyes, startling blue against tanned skin, locked on hers. Didn't mean to intrude, Jack Coulter said, gaze flicking between her and Mercer. Vance Mercer brightened the moment the door opened, clearly grateful for the interruption. Not at all, Coulter, just about finished here. I'll have your order ready. Jack Coulter's sharp blue gaze lingered on Clara Boone, noticing her flushed cheeks, and the way she held herself, pride warring with humiliation. Everything all right, ma'am? He asked. Perfectly fine, she replied stiffly, unwilling to let a stranger witness her disgrace. Mercer hurried behind the counter. Miss Boone was just leaving. She'll stay at the boarding house tonight before catching tomorrow's train back east. Something flickered in Jack's expression. Boone, the mail-order bride. The bluntness made Clara wince. That was the plan, she admitted. Jack's jaw tightened as he turned on Mercer. So you're sending her back? Mercer busied himself with nails. My sister came from St. Louis, you know that. I don't need a wife anymore. Jack's voice cut like a knife. So you let this woman travel clear from... He looked at Clara. Boston, she supplied. All the way from Boston, only to toss her aside after she sold everything on your word. Mercer's face burned red. It's none of your concern, Coulter. It is when a man in my town behaves without honor. Jack's voice was quiet, but carried a weight that silenced the room. Mercer sputtered. I'm sending her back with a first-class ticket. That's fair enough. Jack studied Clara, her well-made dress, her careful speech, the way she stood straight, even as humiliation pressed down. Miss Boone, he said at last, do you still intend to be a wife here in Silver Creek? Clara blinked, surprised. That was my purpose, yes. Jack removed his hat, revealing thick, dark hair. Then I'll give you another path. My housekeeper left to tend her sick mother. I need someone to manage my home. I'll pay fair wages for 3 months. If after that you'd rather return east, I'll cover your fare. If you'd rather stay, you'll have had time to know the town and the men in it. She searched his face for deception, but found only blunt honesty. You'd hire me as housekeeper. Without references, you were good enough to marry Mercer sight unseen. That's reference enough. Besides, a faint smile touched his lips. I trust my own judgment. You look like someone who doesn't quit easy. Mercer snapped. Now see here. Coulter. Jack cut him off. Miss Boone can speak for herself. He didn't even glance at the man. What do you say? Clara's thoughts raced. It wasn't what she'd expected, but this man had stood up for her when no one else had. I accept your offer, Mr. Coulter, she said firmly. Though I'll warn you, my cooking runs simple. Jack's smile widened, softening his stern face. We won't starve. What matters is you'll have a fair chance. He turned to Luke, who had been gaping at the scene. Luke Carver, take Miss Boone's bag to my wagon instead. Mercer's face purpled with fury. You can't just... I already did, Jack said mildly, sliding his hat back on. Now about those nails, Mercer. As Mercer reluctantly filled the order, Clara lifted her chin, squaring her shoulders. This wasn't how she'd imagined her arrival, but maybe Providence had handed her a chance disguised as misfortune. At least now she had 3 months to prove herself not as a discarded bride, but as her own woman. When they stepped outside, Jack offered his hand to help her into his wagon. As they rolled out of town, Clara noticed curious eyes following them. "They'll talk," Jack said quietly. "Small towns always do." "What will they say?" she asked. His lips curved faintly. "That Jack Coulter just claimed Vance Mercer's mail-order bride." Then his voice grew serious. "But you should know, Miss Boone, under my roof you'll be treated with respect." Clara surprised herself by believing him. "I trust you, Mr. Coulter, and please call me Clara." Clara. He repeated her name deep in his voice. "Welcome to Silver Creek." As the wagon left the town behind, rolling toward open country, Clara felt a flicker of something she hadn't dared hope for, something like possibility. Cresting a hill, she caught sight of Coulter's ranch, sprawled wide across the land, larger than she had pictured. The main house stood tall and solid logs, hewn strong with a wide porch wrapped around its face. Outbuildings dotted the spread, and a massive barn guarded corrals filled with horses. "It's beautiful," she whispered. Jack's features softened with pride. "My father started with 100 acres and a dream. When he passed, he left me 5,000 acres and the best cattle bloodlines in Colorado." He guided the team toward the porch. "It's a good life, but it takes grit." "How many men work here?" Clara asked. 8 full-time hands plus my foreman Zeke Rourke. During roundup, we hire extras." He pulled the wagon to a halt, looking toward the house with a trace of discomfort. "Place has been neglected since Agnes Whitlow left." Clara hid a smile at his unease. "I'm not afraid of hard work, Mr. Coulter." "Jack," he corrected, leaping down and circling to her side. His hands spanned her waist as he lifted her from the wagon with effortless strength. For a heartbeat, she stood close enough to breathe in the leather and sun-warmed cotton of his shirt before he stepped back, clearing his throat. For a breathless moment, they stood so near that Clara Boone caught the scent of leather and sun-warmed cotton rising from his shirt. Then Jack Coulter cleared his throat, stepping back. "Come on, I'll show you inside," he said, picking up her satchel. The house was big, but it bore all the signs of a man living alone. Dishes were stacked in the sink, boots scattered at the door, a fine layer of dust softening every surface. "Your room's upstairs, first door on the right," Jack told her as they climbed the wide staircase. "Mine's down at the end." "Mine's down. The other rooms stay empty, though sometimes Zeke Rourke bunkers here if we're working late." The bedroom he showed her surprised her with its size. A tall 4-poster bed, a stout chest of drawers, a writing desk by a window looking west toward the mountains. The linens, though mussed, were clean. Jack laid her things on the bed. "Supper's usually at 6. Don't trouble yourself tonight, I'll take care of it." "Nonsense," Clara said, unpinning her hat and gloves. "I need to get a feel for the kitchen anyhow. Give me half an hour to freshen up." A flicker of respect crossed his face. "As you wish. I'll be out in the barn if you need me." When she was alone, Clara sank onto the bed, the weight of the day crashing over her. She'd arrived expecting to be someone's wife before sundown, and instead had been hired as housekeeper by one of the most formidable men she'd ever met. Yet something about Jack Coulter stirred a trust she hadn't expected. She unpacked her meager belongings, slipped into a simpler dress tied on an apron, and set to work. The pantry held staples, flour, sugar, coffee jars of preserves. In the root cellar, she found potatoes, onions, and carrots. Out back, the smokehouse stored hams and bacon. By the time Jack came in from the barn, the kitchen was scrubbed to a shine, and supper waited on the table, fried ham, biscuits, and potatoes. Jack paused in the doorway, surprise written clear. "Smells like my mother's kitchen." "I'll take that as a compliment," Clara said, setting the biscuits in a basket. "The highest kind." "She was the best cook in 3 counties," he replied, washing up at the pump. They ate at the long table. At first, silence hung awkward, but it slowly softened into comfort. Jack ate like a man used to his own rough cooking, and Clara took his hearty appetite as thanks. "Tell me about Boston," he asked when the plates were nearly clean. She spoke of her father, a literature professor, of concerts and books, and the quiet little home they had shared. She skimmed lightly over the ruin that had followed his death, though Jack's steady eyes told her he understood. "So what made you answer Mercer's advertisement?" He pressed his gaze intent. Clara chose honesty. Necessity, mostly. But also the hunger for something different. In Boston, my life was mapped out the professor's daughter bound to marry another scholar or a lawyer. After my father died, I realized how little I'd chosen for myself. Coming west. That was my choice, even if the terms weren't ideal. Jack nodded slowly. The West gives folks a chance to start over. People here care less about where you came from, more about what you can make of yourself now. "And you?" she asked. "Have you always been a rancher?" A shadow crossed his face. "No. I fought in the war barely 18, saw things no boy ought to see. Came back changed like we all did, but the land was still here. Has a way of mending a man if he lets it." Clara's voice softened. "I'm sorry for what you endured." He shrugged the brief crack in his armor closing up. "That was a long time ago." Rising, he gathered the dishes. "I usually make a round of the ranch before turning in. Will you be all right here alone?" "Of course. I've got enough to keep me busy," she said, gesturing to the kitchen that still needed order. "Don't work too late," he cautioned. Dawn comes early on a ranch. After he left, Clara finished tidying, making mental lists of chores ahead. The house was large, but with discipline she could manage it. She was just about to turn in when a knock startled her. At the back door stood a gray-haired man, hat in hand. "Evening, ma'am. Name's Zeke Rourke. I'm foreman here." Clara introduced herself and stepped aside. "Come in, Mr. Rourke." He entered weathered face kind, but watchful. "Boss told me about what happened in town. Just wanted to be sure you're settling in." His concern warmed her. "That's kind of you." "I'm doing well, thank you." He nodded clearly, weighing her. "Agnes Whitlow kept house here near 15 years. Big shoes to fill." "I don't aim to replace her," Clara said softly. "Only to help while I'm here." That answer seemed to satisfy him. "Good to hear. A ranch this size needs a woman's touch, but it also needs someone who understands the work. If you need anything, my cabin's just beyond the bunkhouse. Boys won't trouble you." Jack runs a tight spread, but holler if you do. When he left, Clara climbed to her room exhausted, yet strangely content. From her window she saw Jack's tall figure lantern in hand, walking the yard, checking every gate and corral before turning in. His vigilance, his quiet devotion to duty, steadied her heart. As she slipped beneath the covers, Clara realized that for the first time since her father's death, she felt safe. The day hadn't gone as she'd planned, not at all. But maybe Providence had written her a better story than she'd imagined. With that thought, she drifted into dreamless sleep. The next few days settled into a steady rhythm at Coulter Ranch. Clara Boone rose before the first light, putting breakfast on the table for Jack Coulter and whichever hands happened to be near the house. The men ate with the quiet hunger of men who worked hard their empty plates and muttered thanks, telling her all she needed to know. Once they rode out, Clara turned her attention to the big house. She waged war against the dust scrubbing and straightening, uncovering in the process a home that had once been cared for with love. Beneath the neglect, she found solid furniture, family portraits and tender keepsakes, a hand-stitched quilt folded neatly. A book of pressed wildflowers tucked in a corner, reminders of the woman who had raised Jack. On the fourth morning, while dusting the study, her fingers traced along the spines of well-worn volumes, Shakespeare, Dickens, Thoreau, when a voice in the doorway made her jump. "My mother's collection," Jack said quietly. She turned, holding Pride and Prejudice in her hands. She had fine taste. His eyes softened. "She would have liked you." The words seemed to slip out before he pulled back, clearing his throat. "I'm riding to the north pasture. Won't be back until after dark. I'll keep a plate warm," Clara promised. He tipped his hat, lingered as though he might say more, then strode away. As the days wore on, Clara found herself looking for those fleeting glimpses of the man beneath the rancher's hard edges. She learned his humor was dry. His respect for the land ran bone deep, and justice meant everything to him. The men spoke highly of his fairness, his skill with cattle and horses. Even in town, when she rode along for supplies, folks treated him with a respect that went beyond mere property lines. By the second week, the house was transformed. Sunlight spilled through clear windows, polished floors, gleamed fresh wildflowers, filled jars on the tables. She even took on the garden out back, coaxing sprouts from the soil. It was there, kneeling among the carrots, when Zeke Rourke hurried toward her. Miss Boone, he called urgency in his step. "Boss needs you at the bunkhouse." One of the new boys took a hard fall. Arm's busted head split open. Clara shot to her feet. "Has anyone sent for the doctor? Billy's riding, but Dr. Elias Boone is tied up at the Thompson place with a birthing. Could be hours." Clara dashed inside, gathering what she could: clean linens, her sewing kit, whiskey, for washing wounds, and a jar of honey her grandmother once swore by. At the bunkhouse, she found Jack on his knees beside a pale young cowboy. "Clara," Jack said, relief plain on his face. "This is Cole Maddox. First day here, and the bay threw him." She knelt by the boy. His arm was already swelling, sleeve rolled back, and a cut on his head had bled enough to make the injury look worse than it was. "We'll have to stitch that gash and set the arm," she said, steady, though her heart raced. Jack nodded, trusting her. "Tell me what you need." With his strength and Zeke's steady grip, they worked. The whiskey burned, drawing a howl from Cole, but Clara's stitches were sure and neat. The bone setting was harder. Jack had to pull while she guided the break into place, sweat beading on both their brows. When at last the splint was tied off, the boy drifted into uneasy sleep, calmed by a heavy dose of laudanum. Jack straightened, watching her. "You've done this before." "My grandmother was a midwife. She taught me what little she could." They walked back toward the house, long shadows stretching across the yard. Jack's voice held warmth she hadn't heard before. "You've got more grit in you than I guessed, Clara Boone. You keep surprising me." She smiled faintly. "And you're not what I expected of a rancher. I wouldn't have guessed you'd handle a wounded man so gently. When you're responsible for other folks' lives, you learn what's needed," he answered. At the porch steps, he turned eyes fixed on her. "You've already made a difference here. The house, the men, even that garden of yours." Heat rushed to her cheeks. "I'm just doing what needs done." For a moment, the air between them thickened with something unsaid. She thought he might reach for her hand, but he cleared his throat and motioned toward the door. "You should rest. Long day." That night, Clara lay awake, replaying the look in his eyes on the porch. He had not seen her as a worker in his household, or even just a friend. He'd looked at her as a woman. It stirred something dangerous inside her, something she hadn't expected when she boarded that train in Boston. She had come to Silver Creek believing she'd be Vance Mercer's wife, in a marriage of convenience. Instead, she found herself drawn to a man like Jack Coulter, whose very presence made her heartbeat stumble. And that was perilous because her place under his roof was still uncertain. In less than 3 months, Clara Boone would have to decide whether to remain in Silver Creek or take the eastbound train. Yet, as the weeks rolled by, keeping her heart at arm's length grew harder. Jack Coulter had started inviting her along on evening rides, showing her quiet creeks and meadows splashed with wildflowers. They spoke easily of books of the ranch's future, of the world she'd left behind in Boston. At Sunday services, she met his neighbors. Most welcomed her warmly, though Vance Mercer kept his distance, and his sister's sharp eyes followed Clara with silent disapproval. One golden evening in June, they sat side by side on the porch, watching the mountains burn with sunset. Jack mentioned a letter he'd received that morning. Agnes Whitlow won't be coming back. Her mother's worse off and she's staying in Missouri for good. Clara nodded, hardly surprised. Then you'll need a new housekeeper, or perhaps keep the one you already have. Jack turned to her, his expression intent. Your 3 months are halfway through, Clara. Have you thought about what comes after? The question lingered between them like a challenge. I have, she admitted softly. But I don't yet know what choices I truly have. You could stay on here permanently with better wages, he said, then hesitated. Or there may be other arrangements. Her heart stumbled. What sort of arrangements, she asked. Before he could answer, pounding hooves broke the moment. Zeke Rourke rode hard into the yard, his face grim. Boss trouble. We're missing cattle out east, at least 30 head. Tracks run toward Blackwater Canyon. Jack was on his feet instantly. The personal conversation swept aside. Rustlers. How fresh, a few hours. They'll be moving slow with that many. Round the men. We ride in 15. He turned to Clara, apology in his eyes. I've got to go. Be careful, she whispered, unable to mask her worry. For an instant he caught her hand, gave it a firm press. Lock the doors. If I send word, Nora Rourke will come stay with you. Clara stood on the porch, watching, as Jack and 6 riders thundered out, rifles at their sides, their determination plain. Whatever Jack had meant by other arrangements would have to wait. The night dragged long. Though Nora came by with her knitting and soft reassurances, Clara's sleep was broken, every sound outside pulling her to the window. Just after dawn, the riders returned, dusty, worn, but victorious. Jack found her in the kitchen, breakfast already cooking. We got the herd back, he said, accepting the coffee she poured. Caught 2 rustlers. Marshal Roy Cutter is taking them to the county jail. Were you hurt? She asked, noting the stiffness in his movements. Only saddle sore, nothing more. He drained the cup. I'll wash up and get some sleep. Don't worry about lunch. Clara's concern followed him up the stairs. Nora, gathering her things, gave Clara a knowing look. He works too hard. Always has. That ranch is his whole life. Seems like he leaves little room for anything else, Clara replied quietly. Nora's eyes twinkled. Maybe so. But Jacob says he's never seen the boss take anyone out riding like he's done with you. Warmth rushed to Clara's cheeks. He's been kind, helping me learn the country. Kind, yes, Nora said with a small smile. But kindness isn't the only thing I see when he looks your way. After Nora left, Clara buried herself in chores, though her mind kept circling back to the unfinished words Jack had left hanging on the porch. Other arrangements. What had he meant? By late afternoon, Jack appeared again, cleaner, but moving carefully. As he came down the stairs, Clara caught the faint wince he tried to hide. She dropped the dough she'd been kneading. You're hurt, she accused. It's nothing. One of the rustlers landed a lucky punch. Let me see. Reluctantly, he lifted his shirt, revealing a deep bruise darkening across his ribs. Clara drew in a sharp breath. You should have told me. I've arnica salve that will help. I've had worse, he muttered, but allowed her to fetch the jar. In the kitchen he sat, as she gently smoothed the ointment across his battered side. The warmth of his skin under her fingertips filled the air with a charged silence neither dared break. At last, Jack spoke, his voice lower. "About yesterday. What I meant to say." The front door burst open. Luke Carver, breathless, stood wide-eyed. "Mr. Coulter." "There's a brawl at the saloon. Sheriff sent me, says the rustlers' friends are stirring trouble." Jack was already strapping on his gun belt. "Tell the marshal I'm coming." He shot Clara a look heavy with frustration. "Seems our talk is cursed to interruption." Clara forced a calm smile. "Go. Just take care with those ribs." He paused at the door, his eyes lingering on hers longer than necessary before he strode out. "This isn't finished, Clara. When I return, we'll talk." Those were Jack Coulter's words before he left. But when he came back hours later, the news he carried swept aside anything personal. The trouble in town had worsened. Friends of the captured rustlers had made open threats against Coulter Ranch. Sitting in the kitchen well past midnight, Jack explained, his jaw tight. "Zeke Rourke's doubling the night patrols. I doubt they'll try something outright, but we can't take chances." "How long will this hang over us?" Clara asked, noting the weariness in his eyes. "Until the trial's done next week. Once those men are sentenced, their friends will likely scatter." He raked a hand through his hair, a rare slip that betrayed his fatigue. "I'm sorry you've been dragged into this." "Don't apologize," she said softly. "This is your fight protecting what's yours." For a moment his expression gentled. "There was a time all I wanted was more land, more cattle success, measured in acres and head counts." His eyes found hers. "But lately I've been wondering if there isn't more to life than that." Her heartbeat quickened. "Such as?" He leaned in, gaze steady. "Such as sharing it with someone who sees the worth in this place, someone who loves it the way I do." Before she could answer, a rifle cracked in the distance, followed by shouts. Jack was on his feet in an instant, snatching the rifle propped by the wall. "Stay inside. Lock the doors." His voice was all iron now, no trace of tenderness. From the window, Clara caught the bob of lanterns near the corrals, men shouting more gunfire. Her pulse hammered. She couldn't sit idle while Jack and the others faced danger. From the pantry, she pulled the shotgun she knew was kept there. Her father had taught her long ago that every educated person ought to know how to handle a firearm. She braced by the kitchen window overlooking the yard, ready to defend the house if need be. The clash lasted the better part of an hour. From what she gathered, several men had tried to torch the barn, but were spotted by the watch. Shots flew. One intruder was hit, the rest scattered into the night. When Jack finally returned, his face was grim but relieved. "They're gone. Zeke's taking the wounded man into town. Dr. Elias Boone will patch him up before he lands in jail." "Was anyone hurt?" Clara asked, lowering the shotgun. His eyes widened at the sight of the weapon in her hands. "No, just some damage to property." He stepped closer, gently easing the gun from her. "Where'd you learn to handle one of these?" "My father believed in practical learning. I'm no sharpshooter, but I know how to stand my ground." Despite the tension, a smile tugged at his lips. "You keep surprising me, Clara Boone." "Is that good?" she asked, hesitantly. He set the gun aside and closed the space between them. "It's very good." His voice dropped low. "I find myself thinking about you when I should be focused on cattle prices or mending fences, wondering what you're doing. What's on your mind?" Her breath caught. "I've had the same trouble keeping my thoughts in line." His roughened hand cupped her cheek calluses, scraping gently against her skin. "Yesterday I tried to tell you I don't want you here as just my housekeeper." Her heart dipped until he added, "I want you to consider being my wife." The words hung in the quiet room, heavy with meaning. Clara searched his face and saw nothing but truth in those clear blue eyes. "We've known each other such a short time," she whispered. "I knew the first day," Jack said firmly. "In Mercer's store when you held your chin high and refused to break." I knew when I saw you stitch up Cole Maddox without flinching. I knew when you breathed life back into this house, turning it into a home. Jack, she breathed, her heart pounding. I'm not asking for your answer tonight, he said gently. You still have time left in your 3 months. Use it. But know this, when I look toward my future, I see you in it. Then, with deliberate tenderness, he lowered his head, brushing his lips across hers, a question more than a claim. Clara answered, by leaning in her hands, resting against his chest, as the kiss deepened, carrying promises neither dared speak aloud. When they finally parted, both were breathless. Jack rested his forehead against hers. I should help the men settle things outside, he said reluctantly. I'll be here when you return, she promised. As he stepped back into the night, Clara touched trembling fingers to her lips, still warm from his kiss. She had come to Silver Creek expecting a cold arrangement with Vance Mercer. Instead, she'd found something she never believed possible, a connection born of respect and trust that sent her spirit soaring. The weeks that followed brought both trials and clarity. The Rustler's trial ended in prison terms, which quieted the threats against Coulter Ranch. Life slowly returned to order, though Jack kept a watchful eye over his land and over her. And though they lived under the same roof, Jack courted her properly, as though she were the finest lady in the county. He brought her wildflowers gathered during his rides, led her on picnics to quiet hollows in the hills, and each evening they found themselves side by side on the porch, talking as the sky burned with sunset. Folks around town began to notice the shift between them. When they walked into Sunday service together and sat in the Coulter family pew, whispers stirred in the congregation. Most were approving. Jack Coulter was well respected, and Clara Boone had proven her worth and kindness. A few, however, did not share the sentiment, none more openly than Vance Mercer and his sharp-faced sister. They're saying I stole you, Jack remarked one Sunday as they drove the wagon back toward the ranch. Mercer's sister's been telling anyone who'll listen I intercepted his mail-order bride. Clara laughed. The sound carried on the summer wind. He cast me aside before you ever made your offer. I was never his to lose. Jack's hands tightened on the reins, his voice steady. No, you weren't. You belong to no man but yourself, Clara. That's one of the things I admire, your strength, your independence, and yet you've asked me to be your wife, she teased gently. Marriage ain't ownership, Jack said firmly, guiding the team around a bend. It's partnership. That's what my parents had, and that's the only way I'd ever want it. The sincerity in his tone settled deep in her chest. Did you find it? She asked quietly. That kind of love. She looked at him, this man, who had given her shelter when she was cast aside, who had seen her worth from the very start, who kissed her as though she were precious beyond measure. I believe I have, she whispered. His smile broke wide across his usually serious face. Does that mean you've accepted my proposal? It means I'm strongly considering it, she teased, though her heart had already made its choice. By the time July rolled into August, Clara's 3 months of employment neared its end, and the answer to her future was clear. She belonged at Coulter Ranch, not as a housekeeper, but as Jack's wife. On the exact evening marking 3 months since her arrival in Silver Creek, Jack saddled the horses and invited her on a ride to the highest mesa overlooking the valley. There's something I want you to see, he said, helping her onto a gentle mare. They rode in companionable silence as the sun dipped, gilding the land in amber and gold. At the mesa's edge, he helped her down, his hands lingering at her waist. Look there, he said, pointing toward the bend in the creek where cottonwoods clustered. Clara squinted, then gasped. A small structure was rising among the trees. Is that a house? It is, Jack confirmed. Men have been working on it for a month now. Just 4 rooms to start, but it can grow. Clara, it's for us if you'll have me." Her eyes brimmed with tears at the sight, the proof of his commitment standing solid in timber and nails. "You built us a home. I don't want you living in the house where I grew up, where my parents' memories linger. I want us to begin together, from the ground up." He took her hands in his. "I want our life to start fresh with a place that's ours alone." Clara looked from the little house back to him, love shining in his blue eyes. All her doubts vanished. "Yes," she said simply, voice trembling. "Yes, I'll marry you, Jack Coulter." Joy lit his face as he swept her into his arms, lifting her clear off the ground. When he set her down, his kiss was both tender and full of promise. When he asked against her lips, "As soon as the house is ready, I want to start our marriage in our own home. 2 weeks, then. The roof goes on tomorrow," he said, with quiet pride. As they rode back, the sun sinking behind them, Clara felt a deep, unshakable rightness. She had come to Colorado in search of security through marriage to a stranger, but had found instead a love that was true. Word of their engagement spread quickly. Nora Rourke gathered the townswomen who gifted Clara quilts and household treasures for her new home. The ranch hands showed their approval in their own way, working long hours on the new house, adding shelves for her books, and tilling soil for her garden. Even in town, most shared in their happiness. Only Vance Mercer carried his bitterness crossing the street to avoid them. "He's just ashamed," Zeke explained when Clara asked. "Town remembers how he treated you, and it makes him look small that the woman he spurned is marrying the most respected man in the county." Clara put Mercer from her mind. There were wedding plans to make. The date was set the first Saturday of September. The ceremony would be held on the porch of their new home, with all of Silver Creek invited. As the day drew near, Clara often paused to marvel at the turn her life had taken. Just months before, she'd been a grieving daughter staring down ruin in Boston. Now she stood ready to marry a man she loved, mistress of a thriving ranch embraced by a community that claimed her as one of their own. The night before the wedding, as she folded her last belongings, there was a knock at her bedroom door. Jack's voice came low. "May I come in?" he asked, waiting in the doorway, hat in hand. Clara set aside the dress she'd been packing and nodded, of course. "Everything all right?" Clara asked softly. Jack stepped inside but kept a respectful distance. "Everything's more than all right. I just wanted to give you something before tomorrow." From his pocket he drew a small velvet box. "This belonged to my mother," he said, opening it to reveal a slender gold band set with a modest diamond and 2 blue sapphires. "My father gave it to her when he asked her to leave back east and come west with him. She always said those sapphires looked like the Colorado sky." Clara's breath caught at the sight and at the history behind it. "Jack, it's beautiful." "I had it sized for you," he murmured, sliding it onto her finger. It fit as if it had always been meant for her. "Tomorrow, I'll place it there again before God and everyone. But tonight, I wanted this moment to be just ours." Her eyes lifted to his, full of gratitude and awe. "I love you, Jack Coulter." It was the first time she spoke the words aloud, though she'd felt them for weeks. His blue eyes darkened with emotion as he pulled her into his arms. "And I love you, Clara Boone." His kiss was tender, but carried the promise of forever. "By this time tomorrow," he whispered, "you'll be Clara Coulter." "I like the sound of that," she teased softly. He reluctantly released her propriety, demanding space, even with their vows a day away. "I'll see you tomorrow at our house." "And I'll be the one in white," she answered, smiling. After he left, Clara stood by the window, gazing at the starlit land that had become her home. In the distance, The outline of their new house waited to be filled with love and laughter. The wedding day dawned crisp and bright September air, carrying the first hint of autumn. Nora Rourke and several neighbor women helped Clara dress in the back room of the freshly finished home. Her gown cream-colored silk trimmed with lace Nora had cut from her own wedding dress was simple, but elegant. Something borrowed, Nora said with misty eyes. From the window, Clara watched as wagons and buggies arrived ranch hands in their best coats townsfolk, eager to celebrate even a few travelers from the hotel who'd been invited. The yard had been transformed, tables set under the cottonwoods lanterns strung for the evening. "It's time," Nora whispered, as Reverend Silas Hart's buggy rolled up. "Are you ready, dear?" Clara touched the ring on her hand, her heart steady. "More ready than I've ever been." Escorted by Zeke Rourke, she stepped onto the porch. Her eyes found Jack immediately standing tall in a black suit, hair neatly combed, his face lit with unguarded joy. The vows were simple and strong. When Reverend Hart pronounced them husband and wife, Jack kissed her with tenderness, restrained but full of devotion. The crowd erupted in cheers, and the celebration began. There was fiddle music and dancing platters of food brought by the women of Silver Creek, and heartfelt toasts that stretched long into the night. Lanterns swung in the branches, casting golden light across the yard. Later, stealing a quiet moment by the creek, Jack asked softly, "Are you happy, Mrs. Coulter?" "Completely," Clara answered, leaning into him. "My life is here now with you." This time his kiss was deeper, no longer tempered by watchful eyes, a husband's kiss to his wife. When they returned, Jack's slightly rumpled appearance earned him a knowing wink from Zeke. As the night waned and the last guests departed, Jack shut the door of their home and turned to Clara with a look that made her heart race. Finally, he breathed, crossing to her. "I've been waiting all day to have you to myself." Clara blushed, though anticipation stirred within her. It was a beautiful wedding. It was, Jack agreed, removing the pins from her hair until it tumbled around her shoulders. "But this just us. This is what I've thought about since the moment I first saw you in Mercer's store." She looked up, startled. Even then, he confirmed. "You stood proud despite Mercer's rejection, and I knew you were meant to be mine, not as a housekeeper, not as a mail-order bride, as my wife, my partner, my heart." In the glow of the firelight, Jack kissed her with all the love and longing he had carried. His hands were steady, guiding her gently toward the bedroom, the true beginning of their life together. 10 years later, Clara stood on the porch of their now expanded home, watching as Jack taught their 8-year-old son Ben to handle his new pony. At her side, their 6-year-old daughter Maggie carefully stitched a sampler bearing her grandmother's words, "Home is where love grows." The Coulter ranch had flourished respected across the territory. Clara had left her own mark, founding a school, organizing a town library, and bringing new farming practices she'd studied in books. Silver Creek itself had grown the railroad, bringing new families and fresh opportunity. As for Vance Mercer, he had long since sold his store and left for Denver, unable to face the daily reminder of the woman he had cast aside. "Mama, look!" Maggie cried as Ben guided his pony in a neat circle. Jack's steady hand close by. "Well done, Ben," Clara called, her heart swelling as her husband looked up and caught her gaze across the yard. His smile, just as it had been 10 years earlier, was full of pride, love, and promise. Even after a decade of marriage, that unspoken bond between them still warmed Clara to her core. Jack's smile, the very same smile that had once given her hope, when she stepped into Silver Creek with nothing but heartache and desperation, still had the power to steady her. The afternoon sun poured its golden light across the spread, and Clara reflected on the long, unexpected trail that had led her here. She had come west, chasing security, nothing more. Yet what she found was far greater love, a purpose, a family, and a community that had claimed her as their own. The woman who had once been a mail-order bride without a groom had instead discovered her true place. That evening, after Ben and Maggie had been tucked into their beds, Clara and Jack sat side by side on the porch, the horizon blazing with color as the sun sank low. Jack reached for her hand, his thumb brushing over the wedding band he'd slipped there 10 years before. "Any regrets, Mrs. Coulter?" he asked, his voice carrying the same tender echo of the question he had spoken on their wedding night. Clara leaned her head against his shoulder, her heart full. "Not a single one." His arm tightened around her. "Only regret I carry is not finding you sooner. We found each other at the time we were meant to," she whispered, speaking with the quiet wisdom of all they had endured and built together. As twilight gave way to night, they stayed on the porch, watching the stars prick through the vast sky above the land they both cherished. Clara Boone, once a woman bound for a hollow marriage of convenience, had instead lived out a love story richer than any she had ever read, not written on pages of her beloved books, but carved into the life she and Jack Coulter had built together in the wild, untamed West. If this story has touched your heart, I invite you to stay with us to discover more true tales of the Wild West. Stories that honor resilience, tenderness, and the spirit that God placed in those who blazed the trail. Subscribe, share. Leave your thoughts in the comments, and join us once again to journey across this untamed land. Thank you.